Green, green, green.
Oh, sorry.
Worn tire.
Oh, shit.
Is now in the lead. Left side.
Whoa,
Clear
hang on a minute,
left.
what's going on here?
Car left.
Oh, fuck, Magnus.
Still there. Your start's okay. We can build something from this. Clear left.
Rake all lights on.
Bill's Kid lights. Thank you.
Car left. He's still there. He's still there. Clear left. On your left. Hold your line. Clear left.
Oh.
He's all over you. Keep your exit speeds up. Stay smooth. Hold your nerve. Just keep it smooth. No mistakes.
Oh, I got a penalty, fuck.
Ignore that fucker in the mirror. Stick to your line. Nail those exits. The gap behind is now 8 tenths. P7. The gap behind is now 9 tenths. The gap in front is now 1 second. You're reeling this guy in. The gap's now 9 tenths. The gap behind is now 1.2. The gap behind is now 1.1 seconds.
I can't see a thing with
The gap behind is now 1 second. The gap behind is now decreased to 8 tenths. The leader has just done a 2:11. The guy ahead has just done a 2:10.8 seconds. The gap behind is now 1.3 seconds. That lap was a 2:11.5 seconds.
Yeah, you pushed me off the track. I got the penalty.
The gap ahead is now 1.9. You're gaining on the guy in front. The gap is 1.5. The gap in front is now 1.3 seconds. The gap in front is now 1.7 seconds. The gap behind is now 1.8 seconds. The guy behind's catching. The gap's now 1.2.
Rigor.
Is now leading. The gap behind is now 1 second. The leader has just done a 2:10.8 seconds. The gap behind is now 1.1. You're pulling away. The gap behind is now 1.2 seconds. Your water temperature's creeping up. The gap behind is now 9/10. The guy behind's reeling you in. The gap's now 6/10. The gap behind is now 6/10. The gap behind is now 5/10. The gap behind is now 7/10. The gap behind is now 4/10. Fastest lap for
Rigor.
2:10.4 seconds. The guy ahead has just done a 2:10.5. Don't be intimidated by this little shit. Make him work for it. Sector 2 is 9/10 off the pace. The guy behind has just done a 2:11. Come on, don't make it easy for him. Make him go the long way around. Right side. Right side's clear. The gap behind is now 7/10. The gap behind is now 8/10. The gap behind is now 7/10. The guy behind's reeling you in. The gap's now 6 tenths. The gap behind has now decreased to 5 tenths. The guy behind's catching. The gap's now 4 tenths. Keep your concentration. Make the bastard work for it. P7. Sector 2 is 7 tenths off the pace. Your lap times are improving. The gap behind is now 6 tenths. The gap behind is now 8 tenths. The gap behind is now 6 tenths. The gap behind is now 1 second. The gap behind is now 6 tenths. The guy behind's catching. The gap's now 5 tenths.
Thanks, F1 Racer.
The guy behind's reeling you in. The gap's now 2 tenths. New fastest lap for
AOR.
2:10.1 seconds. New fastest lap for
Gianetta.
2:10. Don't let this guy intimidate you. You've just done a 2:11.5 seconds. That's your quickest lap. Sector 2 is 1.2 off the pace. On your right. Right side's clear. Car right. Clear right.
Oh no, 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 no. Oh, phew. Hey.
The gap behind is now 3.3 seconds. The gap behind is now 2.8 seconds. The gap behind is now 3 seconds. The gap behind's increased to 3.2. The gap behind is now 2.7 seconds. The gap behind is now 2.7. The gap behind is now 2.7. The gap behind is now 2.5. The gap behind is now 2.6 seconds. The gap behind is now 1.9 seconds. The gap behind has now decreased to 1.7 seconds. The gap behind is now 1.7 seconds. The leader's just done a 2:10. Fastest lap for
Worn tire.
2:09.8 seconds. The gap behind is now 2 seconds. The guy behind has just done a 2:10.6 seconds. The gap behind is now 2 seconds. The gap behind is now 1.6 seconds. The gap behind is now 1.6. The gap behind is now 1.5 seconds. The guy behind's reeling you in. The gap's now 1.2 seconds. The gap behind is now 1.3 seconds. The gap behind is now 1 second. That's a new fastest lap for
Rigor.
2:09.7 seconds. The gap behind is now 1.5 seconds. 7th position. That's your fastest lap. Sectors 1 and 3 are 2/10 off the pace. Sector 2 is 7/10 off the pace. The guy behind has just done a 2:10.2. You're pulling away from the guy behind. The gap's now 1.6. The gap behind is now 1.3 seconds. The gap behind is now 1 second. The guy behind's catching. The gap's now 7 tenths. The gap behind has now decreased to 5 tenths. The gap behind is now 6 tenths.
Oh.
The gap behind is now 4 tenths. The gap behind is now 7 tenths. Stay focused, we're still in this. That's your quickest lap. Sector 2 is 7 tenths off the pace. Fastest lap for
Visa.
2:09.6. The gap behind is now 5 tenths. The gap behind is now 8 tenths. The gap behind is now 7 tenths. The gap behind has now decreased to 4 tenths. Don't let this guy distract you. Don't let this guy intimidate you. Don't let this guy distract you. New fastest lap for
AOR.
2:08.9 seconds. Come on, don't make it easy for him. Make him go the long way around. You're a tenth off the pace in Sector 1. Sector 2 is 9 tenths off the pace. Sector 3 is 4 tenths off the pace. Good consistency. Keep him coming. You're pulling away. The gap behind is now 6 tenths. The gap behind is now 5 tenths. Don't be intimidated by this little shit. Make him work for it. Keep your concentration. Make the bastard work for it. Ignore that fucker in the mirror. Stick to your line. Nail those exits. Hold your nerve, just keep it smooth. No mistakes. He's all over you. Keep your exit speeds up. Stay smooth. That's a new fastest lap for
Rigor.
2:08.8. The car ahead has just done a 2:09.5 seconds. Don't be intimidated by this little shit. Make him work for it. The guy behind has just done a 2:09.6 seconds. The gap behind's increased to 5/10. The gap behind is now 5/10. The gap behind is now 1.1 seconds. The gap behind is now 1.1. The gap behind is now 5/10. The guy behind's catching. The gap's now 3/10. Don't let this guy intimidate you. New fastest lap for
Rigor.
2:08.5. Car right. Hold your nerve, just keep it smooth. No mistakes. P7. Sector 2 is 1.1 off the pace. Clear right. Don't panic. The guy in front is
Visa.
the gap in front is now 5/10. The gap ahead is now 6/10. The gap ahead is now 7/10. The gap in front is now 8/10. Fastest lap for
Rigor.
2:08.5. The gap in front is now 9/10. That's a new fastest lap for
Gianetta.
2:08.4 seconds. The gap in front is now 7 tenths. The car ahead has just done a 2:09.1 seconds. 8th place. Come on, stop being so shit. Try bloody harder. The gap in front is now 8 tenths. The gap in front has increased. It's now about 1.1 seconds. The gap ahead is now 9 tenths. The gap in front is now 1.1. The gap in front has increased to 1.4 seconds. The gap in front is now 1.2. Fastest lap for
Rigor.
2:07.6 seconds. The gap ahead is now 1.1. The guy ahead has just done a 2:08.3 seconds. P7. That's your fastest lap today. Half distance. Fuel looks good. Left rear's hot. The next car is
Visa.
the gap in front is now 1 second. The gap ahead is now 7 tenths. The gap in front is now 8 tenths. The gap in front is increasing. It's now 1.2 seconds. The gap in front is now 1.1 seconds. New fastest lap for
Rigor.
2:07. The gap in front is now 1.2. The car ahead's pitting. That's a new fastest lap for
Visa.
2:06.6 seconds. Hunter behind is pitting. Fastest lap for Hunter, 2:06.2. Car approaching, watch your mirrors. The next car is
Gianetta.
the gap behind is now 6 tenths. The leader's pitting now. The guy behind's reeling you in. The gap's now 5 tenths. That's a new fastest lap for
Record.
2:04.6. The car in front is pitting. The gap behind is now 5 tenths. New fastest lap for
Hideaki.
2:04. The gap behind is now 4 tenths. Come on, don't make it easy for him. Make him go the long way around. Keep your concentration. Make the bastard work for it. P6. Your tyre temperatures are okay. You're pulling away from the guy behind. The gap's now 7 tenths. You're pulling away from the guy behind. The gap's now 1.1. The gap behind is now 9 tenths. The gap behind is now 1.1 seconds. The gap behind's increased to 1.3 seconds. The gap behind is now 9 tenths. The gap behind has now decreased to 7 tenths. The gap behind is now 1 second. Good lap. That's your quickest today. Sector 3 is 2.8 seconds. Off the pace. Your lap times are improving. This is good. You're pulling away. The gap behind is now 1.1.
User disconnected from your channel.
Sorry, Gibbs, sorry. I don't know what guys
The
break
gap behind
very
is now
early,
9 tenths.
or what. That was just weird.
The guy behind's reeling you in. The gap's now 7 tenths. The gap behind is now 7 tenths. behind is now 7 tenths. The gap behind is now 7 tenths. That's a new fastest lap for
Rigor.
2:03.8 seconds. The gap behind is now 4 tenths. Fastest lap for
Gianetta.
2:02.9. The gap behind is now 1.2 seconds. The guy behind has just done a 2:03.3 seconds. You're pulling away from the guy behind. The gap's now 1.6 seconds. The gap behind is now 1.7. The gap behind is now 1.6. The gap behind is now 1.7 seconds. The gap behind is now 1.6 seconds. The guy behind's catching. The gap's now 1.1. New fastest lap for
Rigor.
2:01. The gap behind has now decreased to 7 tenths. It's stopped raining. The gap ahead is now 4.3 seconds. That last lap was a 2:01.8 seconds. You're pulling away. The gap behind is now 2.4 seconds. The gap ahead is now 5 seconds. The gap in front is now 5 seconds. The gap behind is now 1.5. The gap behind is now 1.5 seconds. The gap behind is now 1.4. Fastest lap for
Rigor.
2:00.4. The gap behind is now 1.4. The guy ahead has just done a 2:01.3 seconds. The gap behind is now 1.5 P6. That's your fastest lap today. There'll be chances here. Let's make sure we can take them. The guy behind has just done a 2:01.3 seconds. The gap behind is now 1.8. The gap behind is now 1.9. The gap behind is now 2 seconds. The gap behind's increased to 2.2 seconds. The gap behind is now 2 seconds. The guy behind's reeling you in. The gap's now 1.8. That's a new fastest lap for
Rigor.
2:00.1. The gap behind is now 1.8. The guy ahead has just done a 2:00.5 seconds. The gap behind is now 1.8 seconds. Good lap. That's your quickest today. Sector 1 is quick. Sector 2 is 5/10ths off the pace. Sector 3 is 4/10ths off the pace. The guy behind has just done a 2:01.1 seconds. The gap behind is now 2.1 seconds. You're pulling away. The gap behind is now 2.4. You're pulling away from the guy behind. The gap's now 2.5. The gap behind is now 2.8 seconds. The gap behind's increased to 3.7 seconds. The gap behind's increased to 5.1. The gap in front is now 5 seconds. The gap in front is now 5.2 seconds. That lap was a 2:00.7 seconds. Sectors 1 and 3 are 3/10ths off the pace. Your sector 2 time is quick. The gap in front is increasing. It's now 5.5 seconds. The gap behind is now 5.4. The gap in front is now 5.6. ahead is now 5.5. The gap behind is now 6.4 seconds. The guy behind's catching. The gap's now 5.7 seconds. The gap behind is now 6.2.
Oh, I'm sorry. Take it.
The gap behind is now 5.4. That was a 2:02.1. Sector 2 is 1.1 seconds off the pace. The gap behind is now 5.8 seconds. The gap behind is now 5.7. The gap behind is now 6 seconds. The gap behind is now 5.9 seconds. The gap behind is now 6.1 seconds. The gap behind is now 5.9. The gap in front is now 6.4 seconds.
Gianetta
Is leading the race. The gap behind is now 6.1 seconds. P6, sectors 1 and 3 are 3/10 off the pace. Sector 2 is 2/10 off the pace. The gap ahead is now 6.5. The gap behind is now 6.3. The gap behind is now 6.7. The gap behind is now 6.4. The gap behind is now 6.7. The gap behind is now 6 seconds.
Who took out the braking ball?
You're gaining on this guy. The gap's now 5.3 seconds.
Fuck's sake.
gap behind is now 6.2 seconds. We're seeing significant wear on your left front. The gap in front is now 5.4. The gap in front is now 5.4 seconds. The gap in front is now 5.2 seconds.
Oops.
The gap ahead is now
Nice
5.3. The gap in front has increased to 5.5 seconds. The gap in front is now 5.2 seconds.
Nessa's car's completely spazzing out.
Huh?
You're gaining on the guy in front. The
My
gap
car.
is 4.9.
Oh, yeah. Ooh.
He's
Gap ahead
passing
is
out with the
now
braking
5
balls.
seconds. You're a tenth off in sector 1.
Oh, I genuinely cannot do this. You keep wiping out all the brake balls.
The next car is
GXBBS.
Who, me?
push.
Oh,
We can get this
Janetta.
guy.
Oh, yeah.
Car's all messed up. P2 to P4 because of the stupid... Oh. Needed that P2.
The gap behind has now decreased to 1.2. The gap behind is now 1 second.
Oh, Janetta, your car is leaving smoke anyway. I cannot see a thing.
The gap behind is now 1.2.
Genuinely ruining my race.
Thanks, man. I really didn't expect you to pull over.
The gap behind is now 1.2 seconds. The gap behind is now 1.3. The gap behind is now 1.1 P5. 2 to go. We estimate 4 laps fuel remaining. Your left side tyres are both past their best. The gap
can't
behind is
set
now
a bloody
1.7.
track! Fucking Janetta.
The gap behind is now 1.5 seconds.
Of course.
You're gaining on this guy. The gap's now 1.4. in front is now 1.6 seconds. The gap ahead is now 1.8.
No!
Sorry.
Don't worry, don't worry.
The gap in front is now 1.2 seconds. You're reeling this guy in. The gap's now 8 tenths.
Ett varv kvar. Ett varv kvar.
Oh shit, I'm sorry.
Nej, inte så.
You're gaining on this guy. The gap's now 6 tenths. Last lap. You're matching race pace. This is good. You've got about 3 laps of fuel left. You're gaining on the guy in front. The gap is 4 tenths. Car left. Still there. Clear left. Stick with him. Keep him under pressure.
I can't
Left
see!
side. Clear left. It'll polish out, mate. Forget about it.
Yeah, because I've got a lot of smoke in my face.
The gap in front is now 7 tenths.
I'll show you my replay, mate. It's bloody ridiculous. Genuinely ruined into my
Gibbs
race.
set third weather slot to fog.
The gap in front is now 1 second.
It's not fog. It's bloody smoke. And then it's go.
Yeah, but it all depends on your graphic settings. You should know.
The gap in front has increased. It's now about 1.5.
You have high settings, you see when the rear tires spin. And that's what's happening with Ginetta.
The gap ahead is now 1.4 seconds.
Oh my god. Thank.
Yeah, this is just a fucked up race for me anyways.
P8. Okay, it's over.
Oh, my pedals fucked up in the middle of the rain. I just had to unplug the pedals and plug them in again. Mid-race. Oh my fucking...